Hello, folks. Welcome back to this special edition of our
on
Friday show.
inbound integration.
Oh, something was playing somewhere.
That was
Anyway,
special too.
we are on top of things today. Yes, Friday. Welcome to the end of the first week of Seasons Freezings. This is replacing our How To Happy Hour stream for today. Just a reminder about that. We're usually here at 4 o'clock Eastern. Next week, though, will be early. It'll be 12:30 Eastern, 9:30 Pacific. Scott will be running that one with Jake, right?
Right.
Yeah. So Jake's been on a bunch. He's part of our product management team on the automation side. They're going to be talking about automated diagnostics next week. So that one should be super awesome. It'll be right back here on twitch.tv/PagerDuty. And if you have any questions, you want to give us some feedback, get in touch, you want to be on the show, give us a shout. We're community-team@pagerduty.com. If you have any questions about PagerDuty itself or the product and pieces and integrations, you can hit up the forums there at community.pagerduty.com. So this week, we've been posting stuff on the Rundeck Twitter account for Seasons Freezings, right? And that's what we're going to get into here. Rich is with us today. We're going to talk about code freezes and fun stuff like that. But if you've missed the postings so far on the Rundeck Twitter account, make sure you go back and find those. There are a couple there. There's a Rundeck community survey. You can fill that out. Let folks know how you're using Rundeck, what kind of things you're doing with it. You can check out Damon's post about toil. We'll talk more about toil as we chat, I'm sure. And I'll post these links in the chat too. And then there is a webinar from earlier this year, new best practices for designing self-service automation for IT processes. And you can sign up to watch the recording of that as well. So lots of stuff going on. That was just this week. There will be more stuff posted next week. So make sure you're following Rundeck on Twitter to get all of that cool stuff. So that's where we're headed right now. So there we go. So anyway, back with us, Rich Lafferty has been with us on the podcast before. We had Rich on the podcast last year, and he has kindly accepted our invitation to join us today on the Twitch stream to talk about things like code freezes and anything else that comes up, really. So welcome to Twitch.
Thank you. I think this is the first time I have ever streamed on Twitch.
Oh wow!
I feel like I've done like I've like webinars are behind me now. This is the future. This is great.
Awesome.
And it's great to be back. The podcast was a ton of fun when we did it, and yeah.
Awesome. Well, tell the folks like who you are and what you do at PagerDuty. Just kind of like
Yeah, a little intro. So my name is Rich, down here, I think. And I've been at PagerDuty. I am a staff engineer in our infrastructure group. My gig is reliability. Basically, I design and run our incident review process. I'm an incident commander here. All stuff like that. Been at PagerDuty for coming up on 6 years now. So I like to think that I know where a bunch of the bodies are buried here. And also I've been able to see the company go through a lot of fairly interesting growing pains. I'm located out on the East Coast in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Moved out here about a year ago, and yeah, that's me.
Awesome. So let's kick off a little bit since the whole campaign here is called Seasons Freezings. Can you talk us through what you can share about PagerDuty's sort of approach to code freezes and like what sort of happens there? So like PagerDuty, we're a SaaS. Lots of our customers it's an important time of year for them. Not necessarily, we're not retail, so like there's no Black Friday sales for PagerDuty.
It's tough.
Like, what do we do?
Yeah, so it's a funny balance. It's a funny balance. We do so even though I would love to say that PagerDuty is 100% like DevOps and cloud and maturity, we do some code freezes, and there's a few different reasons that we do them. You mentioned, we'll loop around the calendar. You mentioned Black Friday. That's the one that we just got out of, and in that case, it's funny because what we're really saying around Black Friday, there's two things. There's the U.S. Thanksgiving, followed by Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and the U.S. Thanksgiving one, that's a funny one. We basically do a code freeze from the day before U.S. Thanksgiving through to the Tuesday after Cyber Monday. I'm going to have to say Cyber Monday with a straight face over and over. This is not going to work. Through Cyber Monday. And And so the reasoning there is kind of twofold. For the Thanksgiving thing, one of the interesting things about PagerDuty being an international company, we were founded in Waterloo, Ontario. That moved to Toronto, then went to San Francisco as part of Y Combinator, kept the Toronto office open, and we've been very much, engineering has been split between Toronto and San Francisco, plus fully remote people for a long time. And we recently added in a team in Lisbon. We have some developers in Chile now. And so time zones and all of that really overlap. But the other thing that's different between different regions is vacation time.
Yeah.
Canadian Thanksgiving is in October. US Thanksgiving is in November. So we end up with a situation where a bunch of people are off on their extended Thanksgiving vacation. Because we also give the Friday off. And a bunch of people are also still at work, and we need to manage that. And so that's kind of the first pressure, is how do we make sure that Dutonians can relax on their holidays? The second piece is, we do have a lot of retail customers who are justifiably nervous about how things are going to go for their systems on Black Friday and Cyber Monday, the busiest weekend of the year. But we also have a lot of customers that are supporting those retail customers, whether that be payment systems or monitoring companies and that kind of thing. And all of these people are counting us to be up when they need us. And even though it's kind of, I don't know, it's a bit of a weird taste in my mouth, having a change freeze. We can build up, risk aside, we can build up a lot of confidence in our customers by telling them that we're going to have a code freeze.
Oh, no, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and so that's a big piece of it too. Is on one hand, we do want to minimize the risk of self-inflicted incidents. But also we want customers to just not have to think about it too much. And often we can find that if we say to a customer, yeah, that's your busiest weekend of the year, or the busiest weekend of the year for the companies you're supporting. We're going to do I should be more accurate. We're going to do a change freeze on that weekend. And so you don't need to worry about it. Then they go away happy and trusting us, which is kind of the goal, because we want them. The confidence is just as important as the actual availability. So that's kind of the Black Friday, Cyber Monday one. Is our customers, they're reassured by us having a code freeze in place. It lines up with the Thanksgiving engineer availability problem.
Yeah.
And so then it makes sense to do a code freeze. A change freeze. I got to get this right.
Okay, so talk about that, right?
What's the difference?
I think the vernacular is code freeze, but we're being very specific because there are still so many folks sort of in the office because we're international.
Yeah, and if we go back a step, and one of the cool things about PagerDuty is that we release dozens of times per week.
Yeah.
We're microservices architecture, and each of those services is completely operated by the team that owns it. And they deploy when they want to deploy. Our gates on deploy is code review and a security scan, and then they can deploy. And of course, when we deploy, we use canarying and stuff like that to make sure that the deploy is safe. But we have a lot of deploys, which makes a change freeze a little bit different than if you're a company that does a quarterly deploy or a monthly deploy or even a weekly deploy, because you're not just saying, hey, we're going to hold on to these changes an additional week. You're saying, hey, your whole process is going to be on hold for a little bit. And as for the code and change freeze, if you go back to Nicole Fosterman's Accelerate, and even back to ITIL stuff, everyone recognizes that one of the most common triggers to an incident, to an operational surprise, is that someone changed something. And that's because we're changing things all the time. And these are complicated systems. And one of the things about complex systems is that a change over here is going to have some effect over here. And there's really no way to know that that's coming until you get it out there. You can't help but test it in production. And so making the distinction between, well, if I scale this thing up in Kubernetes, or if I make a change to these database parameters, is that code? Can that go out? No, maybe. The odds of that causing a problem and the odds of deploying new service code causing a problem, pretty much even. So it's a change freeze, and then you don't have to have those conversations about, well, what about this one and what about this one and so forth. And the idea is, for a little while, we're not going to make any changes in production. And we can talk a little bit later, if sometimes there aren't reasons to make changes in production, we've got a process for that. But then you don't have to get into this thing about, well, what is and isn't code.
Interesting. Yeah. And then We also have one over the winter holiday, so there's another one
Yeah,
sort of coming
yeah,
up, right?
and that winter one, we used to. Right now, we have what we call hibernation duty, which is everybody except for our skeleton staff take the time between Christmas and New Year's off. That didn't used to be the case. You used to be able to choose whether or not you wanted to use your vacation for that time, and so what you'd end up with is like maybe a quarter or a fifth of people in the office. And so that was definitely a protecting people's holidays from each other situation. In that, let's not disturb the folks that have it off via incidents that we caused accidentally during that period. And now that everyone has it off, it makes just as much sense. Like, we're only going to make emergency changes during that period. Although during hibernation duty, there isn't really anyone around anymore to make non-emergency changes. So it's a little less relevant, but it's useful to draw that line. Here's the process. If we need to make a change, then it has to go through these steps. And then the last one is that when we ran Summit, our user conference, there was always very important demos, and those demos were usually on live systems. And since those demos were on live systems, we wanted to make sure that someone wasn't maybe not causing an incident, but even just causing a little hiccup during a deploy in the middle of a demo. And of course, there's always a bunch of production pressure around conferences, and you have this line in the sand where it's like, well, no, after this date, a week or two before the conference, no new feature changes. We're only going to make bug fixes and so forth. But people always want to get that one last thing in, and so it's a bit of a counter pressure on get that one last thing in. And it's like, what's out there, that's what we're going to run with.
Your conference-driven development has to have a stop.
Yeah, absolutely. We suffer from conference-driven development as much as anyone else.
Absolutely.
All those new features.
Totally. Because this feels like such a logjam, like last year, I remember there being a kind of a discussion about the thaw process, which was super interesting. I had never sort of seen that practice before. So can you talk a bit about like what are, how things then get thawed after you're sort of like frozen?
And sure. And it depends on what the CodeFreeze, it depends on kind of the nature of the ChangeFreeze. Over hibernation duty, no one's in, and therefore there aren't a lot of accumulated changes.
Yeah.
Leading up to, let's say, Summit is its own, conferences are its own beast. But, over Thanksgiving, the developers that are in the office are still making some changes and so forth. And we've done thaws before where everyone kind of lines up and then we coordinate all of the releases. We've also asked folks to just be, aware of what other teams are doing and to validate their changes when they go out. Don't just merge that PR and go on to the next thing. Be careful to actually validate it and so forth. And we've had pretty similar results from both. That, that change, if that change is going to interact funny with some other changes, then it's going to probably do that either way. The advantage you get from the thaw is you're only making one change at once. And so you can probably attribute a change in behavior to a particular change, but then you have to coordinate it.
Yeah.
Since our teams tend to own their own systems, we don't have to worry too much about actual overlap that way. We do have to worry, of course, about how systems talk to each other. But it's a couple of options. The thaw does take a little bit of coordination. But on a short enough ChangeFreeze, then we found it enough to, anytime you're asking a team to be careful, it's not great. But if you can be very specific about what careful means, what careful means is don't have a big queue of changes to rush and deploy at 9 a.m. Roll out a change, validate it. Roll out a change, validate it. And pace yourselves, do a risk analysis of what you're going to deploy, just an informal one. And go, does this need to go out right away? Can we take this a little bit slowly? And then teams generally tend to do the right thing.
Is that behavior that you want all the time though? To be more cautious about getting things out? Or is it just the fact that you're taking more of a concerted effort to be deliberate about the changes?
Yeah, again, anytime you're telling a team to be careful, something's gone terribly wrong. And we have processes in place that catch a lot of because the fundamental problem is that you're accelerating your rate of change.
Yeah.
After a freeze. Right, that's really what you're doing. If we're used to doing a dozen deploys a day, what we want to avoid is doing a dozen deploys in that particular hour, not just because there's some probability of every change going wrong, but there's also some probability of changes interacting. And there's a probability that pace of deployment might have an effect on our deployment infrastructure. And so if we can smooth that out a little bit, that's good. So it's not so much It's not so much like I never want to tell teams to be careful, give them specific instructions. Like pace your deployments after the code freeze. Spend a little extra time validating them. The canary process should catch most things, but sometimes we want to be a little bit more manual than we usually would on validating that the change worked. And just to kind of flatten the curve a little bit of just the rate of change. Now, one of the funny things about ChangeFreeze is you're always making a very explicit trade-off. And one of the objections that I always get, I also somehow have adopted the ChangeFreeze program itself here. One of the objections that I always get when I send her the email saying, here's the schedule for the ChangeFreeze coming up. People go, don't you know? It's always, don't you know? Don't you know that all a ChangeFreeze is doing is just postponing those incidents until later? And I'm like, yes, that is exactly what we want to do.
So that you're not interrupting someone's turkey and stuffing with
Right,
an
exactly.
incident that you could have next
That's totally
Tuesday
it.
when they're
It does.
in the
I think
office.
it increases the chance of an incident later on. But that's the point of it, is that the impact of that same incident later on, even if the probability of higher, is going to be lower if it doesn't happen when people are hard to reach, or when our customers are really counting on us for our availability during their key times.
Absolutely. Yes. Like, it's good that it's delayed, because like I have had Thanksgivings ruined by on-calls in the past. Like, it's no fun. Like, and there's no excuse for it. Like, knock it off. Stop doing that.
So here's the gotcha. The gotcha is that one of the things that happens during our change freezes sometimes is that we have incidents because we weren't operating the system.
Yeah.
Right. And I have open here because I always reference it during these talks. I have a paper by Richard Cook, who passed away recently, sadly. Richard Cook, called How Complex Systems Fail. And it is my go-to. Is there a way I can drop that into the chat? Can someone drop that URL into the chat?
Yeah, I have it here.
You have it there. You know the one I'm talking about. You can, well, it's how.complexsystems.fail. So maybe that's the one. Anyhow, and one of the things in there, is number 2 is complex systems are heavily successfully defended against failure. And there's another one in there, which, and number 9, human operators have dual roles as producers and of defenders against failure. And so, the canonical example of what could go wrong during a change freeze is a certificate expires.
Oh, I love those. Yes.
Right? Like that's just like everyone listening is going like, oh yeah, certificates.
Yeah.
Because you can't change when they expire, and you've probably got some processes in place. Now we do short, several day maximum. Like our longest change freeze is that one over the Christmas holidays. But also it's a perfect example. If you have an SSL certificate that expires during that period, maybe you've got 2-week and 1-week warnings that one's going to expire, and maybe for whatever reason that's still a manual process. If you can automate that, great, but I know that either for technology reasons or for process and policy reasons, not everyone can do that. Then you might just miss it.
Yes.
And if people were in and operating the system the way they usually do, then maybe they wouldn't have missed it. But that's that's kind of the canonical example, but it's also one that's easy to predict up front. I can tell you today when our certificate's going to expire.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you meet someone who thinks that it's a good idea that all the certificates expire on the same day, and it's like some inaccessible day, like the 1st of January, like, yeah, if you're like a librarian or something, like that totally makes sense to you, but like not for any kind of technical system when you want things to work, right? Around.
Right, every year you renew it a little bit earlier, and it slowly creeps its way towards the times you don't want it. But again, that's predictable. You can put that on your calendar. But the other things you run into is that it turns out, even though like the run book for the system says we do this, this, and this, what's probably happening underneath is a whole bunch of stuff that the operators of the system do on the regular.
Yeah.
That isn't really reflected anywhere. It's not really caught anywhere. Maybe that's doing a little bit of manual scaling up and down. Maybe that's a restart, like do a redeploy to do a restart because something has a memory leak. Memory leaks over change freezes are the best. By which it's a great way to shake them out. If you're in the habit of deploying a few times a day.
Right, you're restarting all the time, and then you let it go for 5 days, and all of a sudden there's like, hey man, it's using way too much stuff there.
Yeah, and so as human operators as defenders against failure might not even be intentional. It might just be that this code happens to get released 3 or 4 times a day,
Yeah.
and therefore the memory leak is never a problem until we decide to put a change freeze in place to prevent incidents. If anyone ever tells you something is to prevent incidents, give them a dirty look. A change freeze to prevent incidents, and then you up causing. Okay. Also, if people tell you something causes dirty look, cause an incident by not defending the system, even though you didn't know you were doing it all. And so that's the other trade-off, right? Is that if your system isn't designed to be run attended for that period of time, you're choosing to run it unattended for a period of time, and you're going to get surprises that come out of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I wasn't even thinking about it that way, but like a million years ago, there was one of those early versions of Windows that on the desktop, if you let it run, 93 days or 89 days or something like that, it would just suddenly fall over because the practice was you use the computer, you shut it down when you're done.
Every night?
No one was leaving the machines on. And then we found out, it's actually more convenient to just leave it run all the time. And it turns out it wasn't set up to do that. So it fell over. But yeah.
And sometimes this can, like the memory leak example, sometimes it can be an explicit decision that months ago we detected a memory leak. We decided that, it will take 8 days to,
and that's fine.
Whatever the limit is.
Yeah.
And well, we look and we never spend 8 days without any releases. And so we're not going to fix that right now.
Yeah.
And then it gets put into the backlog. And that context gets lost, and that backlog isn't groomed. Right? Like, why would you groom your backlog before a change freeze? That makes no sense. And then surprise, this thing we knew was there all along. Yeah, comes back to bite us.
Absolutely.
I'm sure folks listening are wondering, like, well, should we have change freezes or not? And it's an impossible question to answer because there's so many. It's risk and trade-offs, right? If you like in my ideal world, it'd be like, you want to get into a situation where releasing is so low risk that you don't need to worry about it. But then you get in a situation like we have where it's not only our risk analysis, it's customer comfort.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things, and it really is situational and situation dependent. And like, what's the cost of an incident? What's the cost of an incident during that period? What's the, and what are the risks? Like, can we not get the people that we need? How would that affect the incident? And you really have to do all of those calculations every time, which is unfortunate, but there's really no answer to like, is this good? Like a lot of people automatically go, oh no, a change freeze is a terrible idea. It's a sign of some flaw in your system. It's like, well, complex systems.
Yeah. And it's not just the technical side, like it's all the human people too. And like, is it worth it to your team morale and like their participation and how they feel about their jobs? So like have them be as alert and ready during what should be a nice holiday weekend when they don't really need to be. So
exactly. And I mean, you get this natural kind of slowdown as you go into December anyhow. And so you can push against that a little bit, but you can also just kind of accept that as this is human nature. We have our socio-technical system comprised of human and machines, and the humans are going to be distracted.
Absolutely.
Heading into this time.
We got better things to do, man. There's cookies to bake and like all that good stuff.
Which streams to be on?
Yeah,
right.
So with our stuff, like, do we end up freezing like things that aren't technically like our customer facing production environments? Are we freezing like any kind of staging or load test environments or anything like that too?
No. A lot of the development, like during the ETs of Thanksgiving, Black Friday, Cyber Monday is an example. When there were people in the office, they're doing a bunch of development on staging. And we don't actually, one thing I should mention is we don't put any technical gates in the way at all. We don't turn off, we use BuildKite for deployments. We don't turn off BuildKite. We don't block anything in GitHub. We don't do anything like that. We just tell people, you're expected to not deploy. And that's it. And occasionally some deploys will kind of sneak through. Someone might interpret as, well, this system that happens to be running in production isn't used by customers yet, so it's fine. it wasn't really the intent, but I mean, there's also like, that's okay. Or we have some user configuration stuff that is still managed by Chef. And so if there's a new hire that starts on Cyber Monday, then they might just follow the instructions. I mean, how would they know? And someone on the team doesn't catch it. But again, that's fine too, because we've drawn the line. We've asked, what we're really saying to people when we say we're freezing changes is we're saying, hey, there's the risk, like the risk calculation algorithm is changing for this period. And here's the rules that we want to go by.
Yeah.
And please think about that. The other thing we have, I talked a little while ago that you need some kind of release valve.
Yeah.
To be able to approve a change. And what we ended originally when we started doing this, it needed director sign off.
Oh.
That sounds great, right? Well, the director signs it off. The accountability is going to be way up there. That's directors have no idea. But with apologies to our directors have no idea of the context of a specific change. And honestly, if directors do have enough context to understand a specific change, then they're probably a little too far down in the system.
Yeah.
And so the other challenge, of course, is that sometimes you need to make a change at 3 a.m. Not because there's an incident, but because you've been alerted to something that requires some kind of manual intervention, defenders of the system. And so, like, okay, now I need to wake up my director. A, I don't like waking up my director. B, I have no clue how I would wake up my director. I know how to find them on Slack. Ideally, every director would be in PagerDuty. Maybe we're not there. So we actually switched it so that the approvers of changes during change freezes are incident commanders.
Okay.
Because they're used to having, if not the context, the ability to extract the context from the people that are involved. And from there, we just go to, all right, instead of just saying incident commanders, the process to deploy a production change during a change freeze is to use the major incident process. Because everyone knows the major incident process, and it's designed to make these risk calculations and so forth, and it's designed to have a paper trail. And if you use the major incident process, then you're going to do an incident review, which is what we call postmortems. You're going to do that afterwards, and so we're going to have some insight as to how the system developed in a way such that this manual change was necessary in the middle of a code freeze. Which is not to say that team necessarily did something wrong, but there's an opportunity to learn here. Mm-hmm. And so all these things, like even though it's not a major incident, by our severity levels, we always say to everyone, don't hesitate to escalate, and you can bring out the process if you need to, for anything. But it also means that there's like these guardrails that are already in place and processes that are designed to handle operational surprises in general. Because if someone has to deploy in the middle of a change freeze, even if it's not a major incident by impact, there was some kind of operational surprise underneath all
that. Well, and it's potentially major impacting internally to us. Like if it's something that is significant enough, and like complex systems, we also have a lot of external dependencies and platforms that are outsourced to cloud providers and things like that. And like you don't know which moving part is going to be squeaky, even with the best of intentions. So And
there's another example of where a change freeze won't freeze changes.
Yeah.
Right, is if you're at AWS, your EC2 instances in your autoscaling group might cycle out. And ideally that just works. And hopefully you've tested that just works by booping that button and seeing what happens. But that doesn't mean it will necessarily work this time. And so like if you think about it, well, I mean, you don't want it to not cycle out because AWS has identified that there's something wrong with the system. And therefore, we're going to have
froze all the changes. We don't want to change.
Exactly. And therefore, we're going to have change inflicted on us no matter what. And of course, if you're on-prem, the equivalent is, you've had a fan failed or a disk failed or something like that. Surprise, you didn't tell that broken disk about your change freeze.
Hardware does not care about your holidays. Yeah.
No, it doesn't. It makes sense, though, that you would, culturally, you would handle changes during a change freeze like an incident, because it's and it's the same kind of mental shift, because you're doing regular work and then an incident happens and you're in a completely different state.
Yes.
During a change freeze, you're in a different state, and so you need to handle it differently. It's just a little more prolonged, and like you said, the priority isn't as high, and so but it still may need to happen. So you still need to have a little bit, maybe a different hierarchy of approval and things like that.
Yeah.
And so that makes a lot of sense how you would relate the two.
And one thing we do with our incident process, if you go, maybe someone can drop response.pagerduty.com into the chat there. One of the great things about our incident process is that the incident commander is in charge. The example we used in our incident commander training is if Jen Tejada, our CEO, jumps onto an incident and starts getting in the way, the incident commander has the authority to kick her out of the call. It has never come to that. I don't think we've ever kicked a director or higher out of a call. I think we've probably poked at some directors before to say, like, do you want to take over incident command here? Which is also a powerful technique. That's pretty deep in our culture, is that the incident commander is in charge. And so that means that they can they're already empowered to make the decision to ship a change based on what they're hearing from the on-call engineers. And they're also, and to make decisions about other things other than making a change. If we want to communicate to customers, if we want to, if we want to defend against this operational surprise some other way, and so forth. So they're between the facilitating and the decision-making and accountability, the process is already really well designed for handling this kind of thing. It does involve a few more people, but it really is aligned in terms of who do you need in the room to make this decision.
Yeah.
But there was something you mentioned a second ago that I was going to dig in on. Oh, right, the change, Scott. You mentioned the change in mindset between like regular development and responding to an incident, an operational surprise, because it might not be. Sometimes we have these surprises. I like that phrase because sometimes you have operational surprises that don't become incidents.
Yeah.
All incidents are operational surprises. Not all operational surprises are incidents. So you have an operational surprise. And sometimes it doesn't become an incident, but on the team, that mindset change still has to happen.
Yeah.
So even outside of the change freeze, in regular development time, there's this switch sometimes between I'm working on my tickets, I'm working on my code, I'm doing regular development activities, and I have this interrupt.
Yeah.
Right? The systems have decided that I need to pay attention to them right now. And so during a change freeze, we capture that by saying, well, you don't, you have to use this incident process.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's also happening all the time. And acknowledging that, I don't know what to necessarily do about that, but acknowledging that is important.
Yeah.
Especially, if you think that if you have an incident review process, a postmortem process that you get value out of, that's like, focused on learning. Action items are important. Learning is really important. Insights, that kind of thing. Understanding mental models, all that stuff is important after an incident. Well, maybe that's important on a smaller scale on these little things that become not incidents. And one of the advantages you get out of the change you had to make during the change freeze is that by having to follow that process, you can see, oh, hey, wow, we wouldn't have run an incident review on something as small as this before, but I didn't understand how the system worked at all. And now I do. Or the best part is when you get two people whose mental models are really, really close, but they each contain a little bit that the other one doesn't contain. And they merge them a little bit, not completely, but just a little bit more understanding of how someone else views the system. And that's going to help them in their day-to-day as well as during responding to operational surprises.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Always be learning. And I did post the postmortems guide is still called postmortems. There is a ticket in our system to update that to incident reviews and like all that stuff. We have another whole ops guide that's sort of about incident reviews. So it's probably time to like take all that stuff and combine it. But that's a project for next year. So,
right.
But yeah, that's there for folks who aren't familiar with that whole process.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And I mean, the name's not that important.
People don't like it. Like
people definitely don't. Yeah.
Like we don't like any of this medical terminology. We don't like any of this military terminology. Like folks have opinions. So
yeah. I understand the military. The medical, I guess I do get it. I absolutely do get it. Right. The idea, the way that I've heard it, and I am inclined to agree, that if you call it a postmortem, you're implying, like, I was like, well, no one died. And I was like, that's true. No one died. But also you're it's like a scope thing, a scale thing. You're saying something really bad happened. And it's not even the died, it's the really bad part. And, incidents, operational surprises are are a necessary part of running complex systems. They run, back to I've still got how complex systems fail over here, intrinsically hazardous and run in degraded mode. Right? It's always broken, and just sometimes the brokenness converges into an incident.
Yeah.
And so if you don't call it that, I mean, it's tied into blamelessness.
Yeah.
It's just like the idea is you want everyone to get in a room and discuss what happened. It's funny because the discussions that happen in hospitals are called morbidity and mortality conferences. And what happens at an M&M is doctors will go up and they'll talk about their cases, and the other people in the room will give them feedback about their cases. Now, morbidity, of course, is a bad thing that happened where the patient didn't die, and mortality is where they did. And so really we have like more morbidity than mortality. But one of the things to watch out for with that, avoiding medical metaphors, is that there is so much to learn from industries outside us.
Yeah.
And medical and healthcare is one of those. If you read Atul Gawande's books, he's got one called The Checklist Manifesto.
Yes, I was just going to say that one. Yeah.
But he's got other ones that seem less relevant to digital operations, to engineering, to site reliability, to all those things that are really much more focused specifically on hospitals. There's one called Better. I'm blanking on the names of the other ones. But just the amount of stuff that you can learn from how hospitals fail. And like there's a lot of interesting culture in hospitals around the authority of a surgeon, for instance.
Oh, absolutely. And like some of the other culture stuff that sometimes makes its way into DevOps, like the Westrum model, right, of different kinds of organizations, like that came out of medical environments as well, like how doctors and nurses, and can you actually have a frank conversation as a nurse to a doctor who thinks they rule the world, and like all those kinds of cultural issues that fall out of that too. Yeah, super interesting.
And there's like metaphorical mappings, and there's also direct mappings between, just off the top of my head, between the intern and the senior engineer, between the intern and the staff engineer or principal engineer, right? Where sometimes having a different view of how this all works is a huge contribution. And so we need to be careful with the naming, that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Postmortem has some blame involved in it because you're declaring that this was a terrible thing, and we must make sure that like Thursday, if someone dies, and you want to make sure that other people don't die. But when you're doing M&Ms in the hospital, it's a learning exercise, right? Not a blame exercise.
Yeah.
And so that kind of influence is where we don't want to like say, well, we don't want healthcare anything. We don't want to think about how healthcare does it. It's just like be careful in the naming. And of course, the other challenge that we have at PagerDuty is we need to meet our customers where they are.
Yeah.
And even if we take our incident review process and we put it verbatim into that postmortem document, that postmortem site, calling it postmortems means that our customers coming from where they are will find the thing that they want to improve their process.
Awesome. This has been super fun, Rich. Like,
it has.
We have you on all the time.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Come back.
Friday
I do.
afternoons with Rich.
They like me to do my day job here. I will say.
Oh.
That. Although my day job actually feels a lot like this. I'm just talking to different people.
We could all have them all on, like
right.
We could just do all of them right here. Like it's fine. Up to 10 at a time on the stream. It's great. So it'd be fun.
Good party.
Absolutely. Well, no, this has been super good. So I don't know if there's some folks watching that nobody's put any questions or anything in the chat, but if folks do have questions about anything, we can do that there. And one of the other things that the Seasons Freezings campaign is focusing on is toil. And we've talked about toil a little bit with on the podcast episode and in other places. Like it's everybody's favorite target for like get rid of this stuff. And I think one of the things that we're kind of thinking about for folks who do have like a more aggressive like code freeze, where you're not actually doing production work to prevent that sort of backlog or log jam of releases going out after things unfreeze, is to like take advantage of some downtime or slow time to tackle the tasks that just that gross hygiene stuff that has to get done, so it's not hanging over your head all the time. So that
makes a lot of sense, I think, because that's the other thing. Aside from aside from the idea of, well, we're just going to do our regular work and then deploy it all at once. It's like, how can you use this arbitrary calendar time as a shift what you're working on? The first thing that came to mind when you mentioned that, I've had the pleasure of working at 2 jobs now with Marguerite de Trois Maisons, who is a SRE on our delivery team here. She was for a while when I started here. She was the technical product owner for SRE, and she's back moved into hands-on role again. But during her time as technical product owner, she came up with this thing called a Delight Week.
Oh.
And right, and Delight Weeks are, I think it's exactly the same kind of thing you're talking about. We had 2 flavors of them. Well, we still do these. The one flavor is what was called the SRE Delight Week, and the other one was called a Customer Delight Week. Now, this is customer from the perspective of inside infrastructure, where we considered our customers to be the rest of the engineering organization. And during like backlog grooming and planning for an SRE Delight Week, you find all the tickets that will make the SRE's day-to-day that little bit better. We're going to do work this week to delight ourselves. So, if there's that bug that affects 1 in 10 provisions, let's just knock it out so that we don't have to deal with that 1 in 10 anymore. If it'd be nice to have a dashboard that showed this stuff, let's just build the dashboard. And by kind of taking the week aside and saying, this is a special week, we're not going to work on regular things. We're going to tell everyone around our org that we're not going to be working on our regular things. And we're just going to work on improving, on making our lives better inside the infrastructure group. And then at the end, but the great part is at the end, since you're focused on it in a week, you can do some kind of review type thing and go, look at what we did. Look how much better things are. The other kind is the Customer Delight Week, where you're doing exactly the same thing, but you're doing the things to make the lives of the rest of engineering better. And again, they have to do some customer research going in to understand what the sticking points are. But that's where you find what are the paper cuts in the deployment tooling? What are the paper cuts in spinning up a new app? Where are the gaps in operational knowledge? How can we smooth over some of that? And exactly the same process, do the backlog groom. That week, you're only working on things that are going to delight your internal customers. And at the end, you can kind of do, again, like a reveal, some kind of very informal, fun review session where you can show off the stuff you did.
That sounds awesome.
They're great. They're so great. They're so great. Getting them on the calendar is always the challenge.
Oh, I bet.
But if you can take advantage, of the kind of ChangeFreeze when you're around. Now, one of the challenges, of course, is that a lot of these things affect production. Yeah. And so you do have to be careful what you deploy. But still, you can, it's really a case of changing your focus, changing what you're thinking about working on. Yeah. How can we knock out those things that have just, paper cuts is the best. I think the best metaphor for it. Although it's just, there's no damage, but it's really annoying.
Indeed.
Yeah. And to bring this, I know that this is under, even though I'm on the PagerDuty side, this is under the Rundeck banner. One of the recent SRE Delight Weeks we did is we put a ton of stuff into runbook automation.
Cool.
We've had this a system basically. Sometimes an instance will fail in AWS and won't get completely cleaned up. Either it's still in our host inventory, or it's still in Chef, or it's still in DNS and stuff like that. And we've had a bunch of tooling to monitor for those orphaned records in things. But we've never really had the confidence to just automatically remove them. We still want a human to go, that's funny, how did that happen? Okay, that looks fine. But 90% of the time we can just remove them. And so now, when that monitor, which is called Buran because of a very old naming pattern here, like the Soviet space shuttle, Buran.
Okay.
I don't understand that, but when Buran comes up with having found an orphan thing, it goes into PagerDuty, and it's a low urgency alert to the on-call. And it used to be that then they would go into the AWS console and they'd remove the Route 53 record, or they'd go and run the Chef command to remove the record. And now they can just go, yep, it's fine. And computers take care of things for it.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Very nice.
And it was straightforward too, because all of those things are each easy to do. They have a bunch of the biggest complexity is getting the credentials necessary to clean things up.
Yeah.
But we put up with that toil for a long time before we were able to just kind of like take care of it in a light week.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's like I'm having flashbacks because like when I worked at Chef, like that was like there's every Chef node has 2 entries in the database, like one for its certificate and one for itself. And like if it loses track of the Chef server or it disappears or something, then the certificate's still hanging out there, and it's like this big mess. And like people are like, why can't you give us something to clean this up? Well, because it's hard and it's ugly. Totally understand.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes the controls you need to put it in an automated system like that aren't always worth the effort. Like I could think if we wanted to not have that human make a decision about whether or not that instance was actually ready to go, then the automated system would have to have some kind of interlock against, how many records can it delete at once before it thinks that something's wrong.
Yeah.
Spotting those patterns, and of course, I promise, like machine learning is going to take care of all of this for us. I can't wait until that day. That day is not here yet. And that's one of the great things I think about the places when I talk to our machine learning people, how all of our AI ops stuff is so aligned with, we want to make the humans' jobs easier. We want to get them the right information they need at the right time. We want to draw the spurious looking connections that we don't think are spurious for them, but we still know that they are the operators with an intuitive, a gut feeling about the system.
Yeah.
And getting that piece in there. So this is the perfect balance, between like the next step I think here is to how can we integrate some of these signals together to build up some confidence score.
Yes.
In terms of whether or not this is a regular problem or not. But, being able to tell the computer, how do you solve this, is step 0 between having the computer solve it on its own.
Absolutely. You have to start with the steps that is going to remediate it before you can decide, does it need to be remediated? And do we have enough knowledge in the system to do that? So, someday, the future of AI ops, whatever. So, awesome.
I guess the challenge. What's that?
Go ahead. No, we're almost at time. So,
the anti-pattern of delight weeks is that you wait on all that stuff for delight week.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you have a delight week process, maybe don't just do. If you do 2 change freezes a year, maybe don't wait. Maybe do them quarterly.
Yeah.
Maybe do them when you've identified enough. Like, if you want to be agile.
Sure.
Yeah. If you want to be agile, then you put an ethic in Jira for delight week things, and when it gets big enough to fill a week, then it's time to have a delight week.
Now you're thinking with good processes. Yeah, absolutely. I think that sounds awesome. Sweet. Well, cool. This has been super fun, as always. Excellent chat with you. This will be up on YouTube sometime, probably next week. We'll get us up to Claude and have him put it over there. It'll be here on Twitch for the next 2 weeks. So if you want to pass it to some friends out there, you can do that. It will live here for 2 weeks, and then it'll be on YouTube. So yeah, Rich, thanks so much for hanging out with us today.
Thank you for having me, and good luck to everyone out there watching on your change freezes and making it through the holidays, both professionally and personally.
Absolutely. We will wish everyone an uneventful holiday season, right? And good luck with all your season's freezings and all that stuff. As I mentioned at the top of the show, there will be more posts and information and things to do on the Rundeck Twitter feed through next week. So there'll be more stuff to learn if you're interested in automation and all that good stuff from the Rundeck perspective. They'll have plenty more posts for you there. Scott will be back with you on Friday with Jake Cohen to talk about automated diagnostics, which should be super good. We've been seeing a preview of some of that stuff in the release notes streams. They've got a lot of really good components there coming through on the process automation stuff. So looking forward to seeing that too. So, all right, guys. Well, thank you so much. Everybody out there, enjoy your weekend, and we'll be back with you next week.
See y'all.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you never miss a stream. Follow us at PD Community and PagerDuty on twitch.tv. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you'd like to be on our stream, email us at community-team@pagerduty.com so we can feature the cool things you're doing. And don't forget, check out all of our global events on our calendar at pagerduty.com/events.